Hey everybody out there on the interwebs, welcome to the Spork Baking Co-op. I am Mr. Spork and these are Mr. Spork's hands. So later in the week I'm going to try to demystify sourdough bread for you in another video. But in order to do that, you've got to know how to make sourdough starter. And it does take a few days, so I wanted to make this quick little prequel video so you could get going ahead of time and be ready for bread baking later on. It's dead simple. You need a bowl. Try not to get a metal bowl, get a glass or a ceramic bowl. You need some water and you need some bread flour. Get bread flour, or for you kind folks in Quebec, get the farine à pain, pardon my French accent, and you need some kind of a measuring device. It doesn't matter how much, you just need to be able to have equal parts of flour and water. So you take your bowl and you dump in your flour, this could not be simpler, and you dump in your equal volume of water, which is about that much. You'll notice that I'm not putting salt in here. You only put salt in when you're actually going to make bread. When you're making the starter, you leave it out because the salt would inhibit the yeast's growth just a little bit. So you stir that up, and I know you're not going to believe this, but that's it. That's the whole thing to making sourdough starter. Now, there is a little bit of a trick, of course. You have to leave this out on the counter. I'm going to leave it, you see it kind of gets kind of a soupy, battery sort of texture. You're going to leave this out on the counter for probably 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to leave it uncovered. You might throw a tea towel over it or something just to keep something from falling into it. But you want it open so that the natural yeasts in your kitchen can populate that starter and grow and become basically your own homemade yeast factory. You're going to take this yeast starter and sourdough starter, and that's going to become the yeast component in your sourdough bread making later on. If you don't have a lot of confidence in your built-in homemade yeasts that are floating around in the air, you can certainly go and take just some ordinary instant rapid rise yeast. And if I was going to yeast this, I'd probably put in, that much, quarter teaspoon, something like that. But you can also use a natural trick if you'd like. Go to the grocery store and get yourself some plain old grapes. Get the organic ones that don't have any sprays or pesticides on them, and cut about 6 or 7 of those in half. Toss them in there, and the natural yeasts that are in the grapes and on the grapes will populate this substrate and turn it into a starter for you as well. But you don't really have to do the yeast or the grapes if you just leave it out. I promise it'll take a couple days, but it will turn into a starter. Come back here in just a second and I'll show you what to do with it once we get to that stage. Okay, so it's been a couple of days and your sourdough starter has attracted lots and lots of local yeast to the yeast party it's got going on in there. But it's time to get this into a container so that you can store it and, of course, be able to draw from it when you go to actually make bread. I need you to meet Bob. Say hi, Bob. Bob's been with me for more than a decade, and I actually started Bob by going to the bakery in Whistler, a really cool place called the Gone Bakery, and the main baker there, a guy named Martini, was kind enough to just give me a couple cups of his starter, and ever since I've been feeding Bob so that I've got this little natural yeast factory going, and I can make my sourdough anytime I want it. You'll notice that I'm using a glass jar and that I've got lots and lots of empty space up here. In fact, I just fed Bob, so he's kind of full at the moment, but you want to have plenty of room for the starter to grow, and that way when you go to take some out for bread baking, you've got plenty to work from. I feed Bob about every 3rd day, and again, just like making the original starter, you use equal parts of flour and water. So if I'm going to take 250 grams out for a recipe for sourdough loaf, I put 250 grams total weight back in, 125 each of water and flour, and give it a good stir, and that keeps Bob nice and happy. I keep him in the fridge during the summer hot months, and I keep him out on the counter when it's cooler up here in Canada during the winter months, and that seems to do just fine for him. If you aren't making bread on a particular week, do take a little bit out and then again put some back in, because you need to keep that cycle going fresh. Bob gets hungry, don't you, Bob? Yeah, he does. All right, so that's it. There's nothing much more to making sourdough starter than this. I will see you later in the week with the video on how to make actual sourdough using nothing more than a bowl, your hands, this starter, flour, water, a little bit of salt. It's dead simple. Stay tuned for that. We'll see you soon.